So we are starting with our second session, which is also one of the most topical sessions, and also one of the priority areas of the G20, which is on future of work. To chair this session, we have with us Radhika Kapoor, who is the Senior Fellow at ICRIER. Among the panelists, we have Imran Valodia, who's the Dean Faculty of Commerce, Law and Management, University of Witwatersrand, South Africa. R. Nagraj, who's a professor at IGIDR, and Sanjeev Sanyal, who's the Principal Economic Advisor, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Over to Radhika.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's really hard to steer through a post-lunch session, but given the kind of interest we've seen in this topic through the course of the day, I don't think we're going to have much trouble. So, the future of work. The world of work is really changing at a very rapid pace, one that we are grappling to come to terms with, let alone respond to. And these changes in the world of work are driven by a multitude of factors. There's globalization, migration, climate change, and of course, new and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, machine learning, and all of that. And all of these changes really have very sweeping, broad implications. Firstly, in terms of the way they are shaping the future of jobs, by shifting jobs across sectors, by changing the nature of tasks that are involved in jobs, and also really changing, employer-employee relationships as well. We've seen, traditional employment being replaced by what is referred to as gig employment, which is characterized by unpredictable work schedules and precariousness. However, the changes that we see in terms of jobs, they're not impacting everyone equally. There are persons with certain skill sets which are benefiting more than others. The owners of capital, the owners of the robots, of machines are benefiting more than the owners of labor. So we're also seeing implications in terms of the distribution of income and inequality. So therefore, the challenge of the future of work is not just one of the future of jobs, but also of inequality. And inequality matters not just per se because of the implications, the larger implications it has in social cohesion, but also because the kind of inequality that we are seeing, which is transferring income from those who have a higher marginal propensity to consume to those who have a higher marginal propensity to save, is actually weakening aggregate demand and consequently growth. Now, additionally, not only are the implications different across individuals, but also across countries. The way the future of work is going to pan out or evolve is going to vary across countries depending on their history, culture, demography, politics, and of course, very importantly, their social and economic development. And the discourse that we have seen on the future of work thus far largely seems to focus on the advanced world. Of the 3.4 billion global labor force that we have in the world today, just about 20% is accounted for in the developed world. A large part of it is in developing and emerging economies where informality and precariousness is the norm and not, in fact, the exception. Large masses of the workforce here are trapped in low productivity jobs, low paying jobs with very, very low initial conditions. So the magnitude of the challenge of the future of work in these economies is of a completely different order. So as we set out this discussion today, I would urge the panelists to think about this issue from a wider perspective, bringing in how we can change the semantics and the metrics of this debate, which currently reflect a very rich economy setting. So I'd like to now turn to the first speaker, Professor Imran Valodia. Sir, you have 20 minutes.
So can I just start by saying how thrilled I am to be here. Thanks. Thank you to the organizers for asking me to come. It's kind of always great to be in India. I think when I sort of come here from South Africa, I'm kind of always challenged by the by kind of how large the kind of scale of things is here, but also how much the sort of kinds of debates that you're having are kind of pretty much the kinds of debates we're having. we kind of think about the problems as they apply to 50 million people, and you think about it in terms of its kind of impact on 1.3 billion. So I kind of always kind of leave India feeling optimistic that kind of our problems can kind of easily be sorted out, and take inspiration from the fact that you can solve these problems for a much larger part of our society. So I'm sort of going to give you the punchline to my talk to start with. I kind of really want to make three points. The first is that there's a lot of talk internationally, and there's a huge debate about the fourth industrial revolution and its impact on work. My concerns are kind of essentially threefold. One is that I think that the sort of debate often happens without people really understanding what it is that we sort of talking about. Kind of secondly, it's based on a view of the labor market that applies in one particular sort of part of the world, and then the bulk of the bulk of the workforce in countries in the global south. I think there's no real kind of understanding of the nature of those labor markets and what the likely impact would be. And then thirdly, to be perfectly frank, I find a lot of the talk about how many jobs are going to be lost to be driven by hype and very little evidence-based kind of ideas. I want to be clear that I'm not a Luddite. I do think that this is a kind of really important issue. I do think that the impacts will be quite substantial, but I think it's time that we have the debate on a much kind of clearer understanding of what it is we sort of talking about, what the implications for labor markets in the South will be, and that it's kind of about time that we had the debate on some reasonable evidence base. So what we've done at my university to take this forward is to make an investment into a number of research chairs to kind of explore the issue, and we kind of spreading that from the pure sciences to the engineers to the labor market folk, but also to the humanities, because we think that that's a kind of really important area. So some of the thoughts that I'm going to share are kind of really drawing on the work and the thinking we've done to date, and kind of draws on the expertise of a large number of sort of colleagues that I work with. As the dean, I simply do kind of get to do the coordinating and sometimes the talking, but the real work's done by others. So when we understand or kind of think about the fourth industrial revolution, I think there's kind of really three dimensions to it. The first is there's kind of clearly a huge process of technological change happening. I think that is kind of transforming our societies quite substantially, and I think it's kind of throwing up a huge set of challenges in terms of what the leadership and public policy should be doing, but also in terms of how we do those things. And it's the kind of amalgamation of these three forces that I think are kind of really the important issues driving the fourth industrial revolution. Let me say a bit about each of these, and I'm not going to have the time to go through it all, but I think the big issues in terms of technological change are all sorts of new things, kind of including big data and the types of things that we can do with big data. I think there's all sorts of innovations in the financial services sector, like kind of blockchain, and then huge transformations in the way that we manufacture the things that we do. So I think artificial intelligence, kind of 3D printing, kind of new materials that we're starting to kind of handle and think about are all driving a kind of really important transformation in the way technology works. That's kind of having huge implications in the way we think in the way we think about our societies, and kind of in the way our societies adapt. And I think the point I want to kind of emphasize here is the kind of exponential adaptation that we're having to do. So it's being done at a kind of really fast pace, but that's an exponential pace that it's happening at. And I think the kind of changes are going to become more and more important kind of as we proceed. I really want to focus on for kind of thinking about the impact of work. I think the way that it's transforming our societies is kind of really the kind of important issues to think about. And we've tried to lay out in one of our chairs what are some of the driving forces that are changing our societies, and I've tried to kind of lay them out kind of on the slide there. And I'm really kind of drawing on a slide from a chair that we have in the business school, who's thinking about how it's kind of impacting on the business community. So let me then shift with that background to trying to think through what are the ways in which we sort of currently think about the impacts on the labor market. And I'm quite struck by a sort of dichotomy in the way the conversation happens and the realities of the labor market that we have to deal with. So I was at a kind of ILO meeting where the Director General was kind of introducing his kind of program on the future of work. And as is often the case in these international fora, the kind of podium was largely dominated by kind of speakers from the north. And I was really struck that the sort of conversation that was happening was about what are the trade-offs between the time that we spend doing work and leisure. And the kind of arguments that were being made was that the real impact is that we're going to have much more time for leisure, and that we need some mechanisms such as a kind of basic income grant to kind of resolve some of the sort of conflicts that would arise from this transformation. So we're all going to be happier. We'll have much more sort of time for a holiday, and let's kind of solve the problem through kind of some kind of income transfers from those who will have kind of high incomes to those who don't. And in that kind of session, I made the point that kind of reality was something that we just don't see in the labor markets that we deal with. And the ones that we kind of having to deal with are kind of really characterized by large amounts of unemployment, by kind of existing massive insecurities in the labor market, by large amounts of underemployment and kind of disguised employment. So I come from a sort of country where depending on what data you use, the unemployment rate is something between 25 and 35%. And in a sort of country like that, to kind of have a debate about the fourth industrial revolution as a trade-off between leisure and time is just the most the most bizarre thing. So let's I want to shift on to looking at what is the kind of evidence that we have about what the likely impacts would be. And the most substantial work that I've come across in this area is work that's been done by the consulting firm McKinsey, and they've done pretty extensive surveys with firms to try to sort of gauge what the likely impact would be. And if you're interested in some of the work, the kind of author is James Manyika. He's a Zimbabwean economist who runs their consulting arm. The first bit of interesting data is an assessment of from firms how much of the potential to sort of go along the fourth industrial revolution has been realized. And it's kind of striking that for the countries that we have data for, it's an extremely small number, really. So even in the US, it's only 18% of what the potential is. And in a sort of country that we could compare with Brazil, it's kind of just realized 5% of its potential. And I think you have some sense from that of what the scale is of the transformation we're likely to see. He and his authors have done some kind of assessments of which are the sectors of the economy that are most likely to be transformed from kind of sectors that we can automate, and you can see that there's quite a variance across sectors, and I think it really impels us to think about what would be the sectoral distributions of what these labor market changes would be. And another bit of the analysis that they've done is this kind of stop-go analysis. So on the vertical axis is kind of sectors of the economy, and kind of on the horizontal axis is different activities that you can automate. So kind of hardly surprising, the most automated sectors are kind of in ICT and so on, and kind of agriculture down there would be the least automated and the most likely to become automated. And you can see that for kind of different types of activities, there's different levels of automation at present. So what's kind of really striking about the work that they've done is it's the only kind of reliable kind of evidence that I've seen of the likely impacts on the labor market. And I think we kind of often think about the labor market impacts only in terms of what are the jobs that we're going to lose. We kind of know, if we look back at these big kind of changes in technology, you kind of essentially have a churning process. So you have some jobs are lost, but some jobs are gained. And this kind of churning process will happen. The kind of real issue is what's the nature of that churning process likely to be, and what are the likely impacts for sort of countries across the globe. And the kind of striking finding here, and it's consistent with a point that was made in the first session, is that so kind of for the US, that's the job losses, that's the job gains, and that's the net gain. So we're likely to see a net loss of jobs in the US. For a country like yours, the kind of estimates suggest that the impact's likely to be the reverse of that. So that's the job losses there. That's the gain, and the prediction is that we'll see a net increase in the numbers of jobs. Now you might agree with that finding, or you might not. My sort of point really is that we need to move from the hype to doing serious analysis like this. And I think there's a kind of real imperative for the researchers and sort of policy makers to start to do some work along these lines. Let me just then turn to a few other issues that I think might be something we need to think about. So in many countries such as mine and yours, I think the largest proportion of workers are in fact in the informal economy, and I've not yet seen any reliable kind of research that is starting to think about what would be the impacts on informal workers. By my understanding, in India, it forms something between 70 and 90% of your employment. And if we kind of really want to understand what the impacts would be, that has to be the kind of place that we focus our attention. I think what we can kind of probably reasonably kind of reliably expect is that it's likely that these kind of churning processes are likely to increase levels of inequality, and I think it's about time policy makers started to think about what are the ways in which we're going to manage this inequality. As things are, the levels of inequality are pretty bad. We expect that we're going to get worse, and I think there's a kind of real imperative to start to do some work in that field. In South Africa, we've somewhat moved against the tide in that we're about to kind of introduce a minimum wage that's going to apply kind of across the whole kind of across the whole of the economy. And I think policies like this are ones that we should really start